Good afternoon, everyone. We're carrying on with our normal for 2020 business reaction series. My name's Tom Caulfield, agricultural partner at Arnold's Keys. I've got with me my colleague Mark Mayhew, commercial partner from Arnold's Keys. Today we're joined by Richard Jones, operations manager of IP21. Richard, thanks very much for talking with us and taking time out of your day. Can you just first of all just tell everybody who you are and a little bit about yourselves and IP21?
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me. And yes, I'm from IP21. We are an intellectual property law firm. An intellectual property law, essentially what that means is we help people to register and protect and enforce their innovation and their invention. Typically speaking, the main sort of aspects of IP law are patents, which protect an idea or how something works. Trademarks, which of course protect branding, how an item is sold. You have registered designs, which protect how an object looks, and you have copyright, which protects creative works. We cover all those areas, and we work with innovative people and businesses who want to protect their innovation and to enforce it against infringement.
So I suppose as a result of the crisis in March, how's that affected business? Is it sort of seen as sort of a nosedive, or has it been quite positive and with new startups and new innovations?
Yeah, it's been quite interesting, really. So there are the sort of positive and negative factors really pushing in sort of opposite directions there. So yes, obviously we, as a business-to-business sort of service provider, we've noticed that businesses are being careful how they spend cash, etc. Therefore, of course, certain businesses will pare back, and legal advice is sometimes an area where businesses will look to try and save some money. And clearly, some businesses have struggled with the climate, and they've been unlucky and not been able to survive. So we've had obviously some businesses within our client base sadly go out of business. But on the other side, I think because the nature of the IP legal systems is such that it's a process of applying for an IP right typically, and that takes a bit of time. There's a bit of sort of back and forth with the IP granting offices and so on, and so it's a process that can take a couple of years or so. So there's already a certain core workload of people already in the system, if you like, that are working towards getting their rights granted, etc. So that sort of level of work has been able to sort of continue relatively uninterrupted for us. Again, as you mentioned, on the positive side, of course, as with any crisis, it does breed innovation. And so we're getting quite a few new inquiries, both from existing clients and from new clients looking at starting new products, new projects, new technology advancements, as you would imagine, as businesses and people adapt to the post-pandemic world and create new products and new ideas for how society can function under these guidelines. And that, of course, leads naturally to new innovative projects and therefore new applications for IP rights.
Richard, you touched on there sort of adapting. Has IP21, had to make sort of any significant changes to the business, in light of the ongoing pandemic?
I think the biggest one, as I suspected, is for most sort of office-based businesses, was the enforced home working, really. Was obviously a big challenge for us. We were part of the way along that road anyway, so we had a good starting point in that I would say that about 50% of our staff were already set up to work from home fairly comfortably. The challenge, of course, was the other 50%, as you can imagine, which we sort of fairly rapidly had to try and set up in a home working setup. And then, of course, working through all the implications for that, particularly given that we are, obviously we deal in intellectual property rights and all of our work is governed by client confidentiality. There are issues of remote working around IT security and security of information, which make it slightly more complicated, I'd say, than perhaps for some businesses that are operating remotely, purely because we have to guarantee, obviously, that level of secure information. So we had to invest a bit in IT. It was quite a busy 72 hours, as I'm sure it was for many businesses once the guidelines were first announced and the first lockdown came in. But we were able to adapt, and luckily our team were very good in how they very quickly were able to work out how best we could work remotely, and obviously we could identify where the gaps are and which tasks had to be worked around or had to be solved in a different way, and so that was what we had to do. But no, essentially we were able to continue operating, luckily, as a company. We didn't have any sort of official downtime or closure as such. And once we were up and running with those systems, we've been able to operate since, to be honest, without any major disruption, which has been good. So from that point of view, we've been relatively, touch wood, sort of unscathed, really, compared to some industries, of course, which have been far less lucky. We've been able to sort of continue to operate with our staff working from home.
Yeah. Any challenges sort of reopening and getting people back into the office? I know obviously recent announcements have sort of put sort of a different turn on that, but when everything was sort of in June, did you reoccupy your offices and sort of bring everyone back, or what was the position on that?
Yes, we took a decision on that we made the offices COVID secure, and we put them in a position to be reopened, but we did it on an optional basis for staff. So we did quite an in-depth working survey to all of our staff just to find out about how people were really in general, how their sort of approach to working arrangements would be, what their personal situation was. Because one thing we noticed, and we only have 25 staff or so we're not a large business, but this pandemic has affected everyone differently, and everyone has different personal circumstances and so on. And the range of responses we got back was quite diverse, even in a relatively small team. Some people wanting to remain exclusively at home, some people wanting to come exclusively back to the office, and everything in between, to be honest, from hybrid arrangements and working hours and everything else, as you can imagine, as people tried to balance their work and their life commitments, etc. So we took the decision to offer people pretty broad flexibility, provided that the work got done, and that was obviously what we were monitoring, and that seemed to go okay. To say that the offices are there if people want to come back and use them, and obviously a number of staff did, but it's on an optional basis, so we're not forcing people back in. Anyone who's more comfortable or generally can work efficiently and effectively from home, as we all had to do for several months, was able to continue to do so. So we ended up with a bit of a hybrid.
There's been quite a lot of talk, Richard, health, well-being, mental health in particular, especially with everybody, during lockdown and working from home and things like that. Any particular sort of processes or practices that IP21 have put in place, to sort of, keep in contact with staff and monitor, everyone's well-being?
Yeah, I think so. I think that was a challenge that it's something that it's difficult to sort of understand the implications of in the early stages of the lockdown, because it's a developing situation, of course, and for us it's always tough to know, because everyone is in a different situation, and everyone being forced to work from home is in different environments, and have different stresses on their lives, etc. And particularly when the schools were closed, it was very difficult because people were trying to juggle homeschooling with obviously work commitments and other issues as well. So it was tough. I mean, we found that after a period, from sort of anecdotal feedback from colleagues, that we put in place a few things to try and help that. So we started having some social teams meetings, so arranging some online coffee breaks and things like that were deliberately not of a strictly work focus, allowed people just to have a bit of a chat, catch up with each other. We started sending around a bit more up-to-date company information as well, just about generally fee revenues, how the company's doing, etc., just to sort of reassure people, because we found that whilst obviously a number of us were aware of how the business was doing, a lot of people, of course, are based at home. They don't hear things in the office. They don't have that sort of general chit chat and feeling for how things are going. And they were obviously worried about their job security and various other anxieties, which are perfectly understandable in this kind of scenario where sadly there are a lot of redundancies and people were natural to worry about those things. But we started sharing a bit more information just to help try and reassure people that the company is stable and is operating well. And I think that went down quite well. People appreciated that. They felt a bit more in the loop, and they didn't feel quite as sort of distant from the company by working from home. But it is an ongoing challenge, and I've had a number of conversations with colleagues about all kinds of different concerns that they may have had or other issues. And the other challenge of not obviously having that sort of daily face-to-face interaction is things like tone of voice can be miscommunicated in emails and so on, and body language isn't an issue either, and so those forms of communication, of course, don't really come across. So sometimes people may get the wrong end of the stick on certain issues, or may jump to the wrong conclusions, and I think that can be exacerbated by working from home, and so there is sort of a constant challenge to try and increase or improve communication as a whole when working from home, which is an ongoing battle, really.
Yeah. There's some good positives there. Any other sort of standout positive sort of processes or instances which you've sort of light bulb moments during sort of lockdown and since?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me anyway, I think it's interesting that it was, whilst it was entirely forced, of course, and it had a number of challenges, it did prove the business model, for us at least, that remote working can be effective, and that there were some doubts amongst certain people in the company, of course, about how effective that could be, how efficient it could be, etc. And I think it was slowly the way the world was going anyway, in terms of this sort of work-life balance. Getting people to give up the daily commute and sitting in traffic for an hour and a half a day, etc. And I don't think we'll ever go back to those days. And in a way, although it was done in a very forced way, which did cause problems, it has proven that certainly for us as a business, we can operate successfully remotely. We can complete all of the work that we need to do. We can get everything done that we need to. And so going forward, I think that the biggest positive for us as a company will be that we can have proper conversations with people about their working arrangements going forward. It's not going to have to be 9 to 5 in the office Monday to Friday, etc. It will be more flexible. We will be able to accommodate personal requests to give people a healthier work-life balance, I think, without any detriment to the business, I think. So I think that's been a very positive step for us. We have the proof now that model can work, and so that'll be a good thing going forward. Perhaps just on the client side, we have also seen a lot of innovation amongst our client base. Typically, of course, we are working with innovative businesses, so you would expect them to be able to adapt to that. But it's been quite uplifting, really, the way that a lot of our clients have developed new products and services for society, post-COVID. They're the obvious ones, of course, for biochem companies who are looking for vaccines and treatments and so on. But even beyond that, we have food and drink clients, alcohol manufacturers who are sort of going into hand sanitizer and other antimicrobial products. We have fashion and creative houses who are developing new clothing lines, etc., for society based on guidelines and things like that. And we have product developments designing consumer goods, some of which will be very valuable to society for the next 20 years or so. And a lot of that has been on the back of this forced situation that we find ourselves in. So there have been some positives, both for us as a business and I think in generally amongst the business community. And so there are good things to take from it.
Richard, the government brought in quite a few helping measures, shall we say, for business. Most common one, tends to be the furlough scheme, and then there's the CBIL loans and things for businesses. Did IP21 make use of the furlough scheme? And if not, generally any sort of comment from IP21 as to sort of, how well the government sort of stepped in to help?
Yeah, I think there were a broad degree of measures which obviously did help a lot of businesses. For us personally, we didn't use a furlough scheme. Luckily, we were able to have all staff continue to work from home on their sort of standard employment contracts, etc. So we didn't have to furlough anyone, which we're lucky in that we can say that we weren't in that position. We did apply for the coronavirus business interruption loan, the CBIL loan. We had some frustrations with that, as I suspect you may hear from other businesses, and that the timescales were the main ones. We applied very early indeed, as a lot of businesses did, and it took a long time to us. It was over 3 months. It was nearer to 4 months that from the time of application that we actually got the cash into our bank. So for us, the main frustration was that it just took a very long time. Of course, when it was announced as emergency cash that would be quickly available, etc. And I know that there are some issues and these things take time, of course. There's a due diligence process that the banks have to go through. But looking back on it now, I think that could have been done better, or could have been streamlined better, perhaps through the banks and the systems they use, because it did take us a long time. Luckily, we didn't need the cash, of course, and for us, it's there. It's great that we can use it now, and it's a booster to our cash flow. But if we had have needed it in sort of 4 to 8 weeks, then we would have had a real problem, because that was difficult to get hold of. But obviously great once it arrived. So yes, I have mixed feelings about it. Obviously, it was great that it was on offer, but it did take a long time to actually materialise for us, which was a bit of a frustration. But no, generally, I've got friends and contacts of mine who've used the bounce back loan scheme very successfully, and of course, I have friends who've used the furlough scheme as well. But we didn't have to do that, luckily.
In terms of sort of the government and responses, and if you're doing the school report, what would your sort of grade for the government's handling of the current situation we're in?
Well, that's a very hard question to answer. To be honest, I can't give too much away, really. I don't want to share any of my own personal views, really. But no, generally, I can appreciate the position that they're in. It's incredibly difficult to balance these ideas of obviously healthcare and the economy. It's an almost impossible line that they have to try and draw somewhere between the two. And all I can say is that I'm glad I'm not currently in government.
So am I.
So, Richard, what's your view on what the future now holds for yourselves at IP21?
Yeah, so it's a good question. It's one of the implications of obviously the uncertainty we live in is that long-term planning is very difficult for us at the moment. One thing we're doing in the short term is looking at our office space, as I suspect a lot of companies are. We're looking to downsize, I think, reduce our floor space, either by taking on a smaller floor space within our current office or looking elsewhere for a smaller office. I think that one thing that is certainly almost could be banked on is that working arrangements won't be the same even once if there is a vaccine or better treatments, etc. Then I think, because we've proven that the business model can work with a more flexible arrangement, that will be the way going forward. So we're looking at making better use of our office space through things like hot desking and generally not requiring as much floor space, so we can save some money on rent and service charges and business rates and so on. So that's something that we're currently putting into process. We're actually a bit lucky in that we had a break point in our lease this year, so we can benefit from that in the short term. And so that's something that very much will be good for the business. I think looking ahead of that, beyond that, business development has been affected in our industry, of course, because as a professional services firm, we would get a lot of clients through going to trade events, trade shows, exhibitions, conferences, anything around looking at scientific innovation or technology, and we'd meet companies there, we'd meet new clients, etc. And we'd also sort of network with other professional advisors who would send us referrals when IP advice came up as a need, etc. Of course, all those things, traditionally are done on a face-to-face basis, having everyone in the same place at the same time. And that, of course, there's a lot of uncertainty whether that will ever be able to go ahead again. So we're switching some of our business development investment into some digital means, trying to use things like LinkedIn and social media slightly more, trying to use things like Teams and Zoom and video calls a bit more, and trying to adapt to allow that sort of future pipeline of work to continue to come in a digital environment. So that's sort of been a couple of the changes that we've sort of had to bring on board in the way that we're planning for the future. But as we're all aware, it's very difficult to make concrete plans as such, because none of us really know the situation that we'll be in 12 months and 24 months or 5 years time. So we'll see how it pans out.
Thank you ever so much for joining us this afternoon, Richard. It's been good to hear how IP21 have got through so far this pandemic and the future for you and the steps you're taking, and it looks positive. And thank you very much for joining us.
No, I appreciate it. Thanks for having me, and all the best.
Thank you.
Thanks, Richard.